Hello, I'm Mark,
And I'm Cindy,
and we're the hosts of Mercy on Display.
a storytelling podcast about God's mercy in people's lives.
From dating to marriage, parenting to careers, and everything in between.
We hope you'll be inspired, encouraged, and grounded in God's purpose for your own life.
We're glad you're here. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, friends. Today, we're going to be interviewing Andrey Ivanov. Andrey was born in Kyiv, Ukraine, in the former Soviet Union, was raised in a large family of 13 children by his wonderful parents, Viktor and Anna Ivanov. As he embarked on a journey to find his purpose in life, he realized that his faith in God was not merely about attending church on Sundays, but about truly living it out by serving others. This discovery ignited a deep passion within him to serve and bring people together. Andrey believes that serving others is akin to igniting small fires of hope, reminding humanity that compassion and kindness are still very much alive. With his belief, he strives to make a positive impact on his community and unite people from all walks of life. Andrey continues to inspire others through his selfless acts of service, embodying the power of faith and the strength of unity. Andrey is also the founder of an organization called Flash Love, a non-profit in Vancouver, Washington, where he serves women, children, youth, and the elderly in his community. Through his organization, he's making a big change, and we're excited to hear that today. Welcome to the show, Andrey. Good morning. Hi, Andrey. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being on the show today. So we're really excited to talk to you. I know that you have a very interesting amount of projects and different amazing things that you do in the community. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But just to learn a little bit about yourself, where did you grow up? And did you grow up in a Christian family?
Yeah. Wow. Where did I grow up? Well, I was born in the former Soviet Union before it fell apart. And I was in Kyiv, Ukraine in 1984. And I grew up in a very busy family. It was like a beehive growing up. I'm one of 13 kids.
Wow.
So that was fun, you know.
Family.
There's a lot to talk about there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did grow up in a Christian home. There was always love. There was always comfort and protection from the outside world, which had its benefits, growing up, but then it had its own confrontations and a massive wall of reality that hit after.
Right.
Yes.
Have you always stayed in your faith, or have you ever walked away? And when did you become a true Bible-believing Christian?
In the teens, when you start to make things your own, and it's not what your parents have, taught you to believe. It has to be your own at one point, and you have to either own it or, well, you would otherwise reject it. To me, when the world came at me, it was so contrary in a lot of ways, and I'd have to take time to even unpack this. But when the reality of the world hit me, it really sent me tumbling, and I see that in a lot of youth, today when I see their walk. If there wasn't alignment with that walk, that Christian faith that was their own, that was love and centered on Christ, I don't want to say 100% because none of us know what that means other than reading His words and walking that out in the most real way. It'll send you tumbling like it did me, and that was my story for a while. I was in many ways repulsed to a lot of the doctrines and really strict rules that were never even in the gospel. And so for me to undo a lot of that stuff, it was years of unnecessary confusion and even, I would say, suffering that was inflicted on either myself or through myself on others because of me trying to understand what the truth was, because so much of it was infiltrated with, rules and religious practices rather than the red words that he spoke.
Wow.
From his heart.
I think some of us who've walked that path too have had to go down a really, I guess, bumpy road, or not even a road at all, but out in the wilderness until you find yourself way back, but you see things differently. At least that was, for me, a really big part of why I left my religion and instead decided to explore what I call truth, and then finally come back into, all right, what is this Bible? Who is truly Jesus? And it changed my life forever, for sure.
Truth and justice is the core of what humanity yearns for, whether they can explain it or not. I mean, you can offend a little girl, as a child, and she can hold that grudge for a long time because an act wasn't just, or a little boy. So ultimately, humanity knows that there's something very righteous about those things, truth and justice. And when those things get tainted, it pulls us away. It rips at our core, and long before we can even explain, what that was. But if we live in accordance to, our Jesus, and actually live out how he has, invited us into that walk, we minimize the amount of suffering that we oftentimes cause because we're simply trying to, teach people, to do better in their lives for themselves.
I love that. I think what you mentioned is that circle of the Slavic upbringing. I feel like those walls and the structures when you're young could be very strong, could be very tall. And it's so beneficial as a child and adolescent years as well. And I feel like they guide you. There's a good sense of foundation. And I feel like it's very important for every child and teen. But when things get tough, when you're able to, I think, get into your early 20s and see to where maybe some of the people around me are not perfect. So you're questioning, well, why are your motives and your actions are not lining up with your words? And then things get tough inside the heart, inside the mind, and all of a sudden, then it's a journey. And it's such a very distinct and a very important moment for a young man, I would assume for young ladies as well, to where then that's when your faith gets really raw, to where you got to meet Jesus in this faith that was passed down from your grandparents, what you saw in your parents. Now you have to make it your own, because it's the brokenness that you see around you, whether that's your neighborhood, for those that don't know Christ, are in a dying world and desperately need the good news and that message of salvation. And you're realizing, well, there are broken people around me. What am I going to make of it?
Because you really saw that.
Yeah.
Because you started with Flash Love and what can I do? You saw the brokenness, and then how can I inspire these young men and women? I think that's the beauty of everything you do, which we'll get to.
The emphasis was, like there's two ways to govern or to parent. I mean, you can call it the same thing in some ways, but there's one way that is operated on punishment for all the wrongs, and there's another way that is operated on reward, which is inviting, inspiring them to be better. And humans, time after time after time, respond better to reward because they want to be better. So you call them. It doesn't mean that there isn't room for for punishing and laying down some very clear guidelines of where to walk. Like, I'm not dismissing those, but generally speaking, we as humans unfortunately are not good at the reward side because we're hard on ourselves. So therefore, it reacts that way on others. And so when we launched Flash Love, the intent was that, hey, let's stop trying to be perfect to then one day serve the Lord. Let's just serve the Lord and then allow Him to do what He does best, as we call each other higher to simply go and serve humanity. And what that does is it shifts your mind from the things that you don't want to be into the things that you do, and you begin to move towards that. It's a very fundamentally effective process. So that was one of the critical effective areas of the shift that we made, and what made this so enticing and really motivated a lot of youth from the very, very beginning. Not limited to youth, but that was, our target demographic.
you don't have to be perfect in order to come to Jesus and actually do the work. And then for you to, little by little, like your heart starts seeing. And I remember hearing one of your podcasts, you said you start seeing those lines black and white and not just gray. And that's when you start actually seeing what goodness is and what is bad. And I think that applies to.
Well, when
Yeah.
you judge, when you stay in a place of judging people, like for instance, like I grew up in a place and it wasn't always that way. You just kind of like, eventually like I crawled that way. We're at a point where it's like, there's all these things that we are not the world is, like people with tattoos, people with skirts that are a little bit too high, people with this, people, all these things, and the hair, and I mean, and so there's all these things of all of what people around us are, and we're not. So what that it's implying to a young mind at the time is we're good, they're not, so therefore you're not of that world. So I'm like, well, how are you supposed to accept them? And it puts this in a very weird space. It's like, so are they all going to hell now? Like it's weird. And that's not at all of what the heart of Christ was. Look who he was the hardest on. The teachers.
Yeah.
Those are the people that he picked up a whip, to. And yet he loved, forgave, and invited the rest. And it's not that they didn't have salvation, is they knew what they were doing. So anyway, like that to me, when I realized, the simplicity of the gospel and the fact that we all get to move, towards his heart, every day and have that same kind of compassion and mercy to others. Gosh, it takes a load off your shoulders and you get out of the judgment seat that you were never authorized to sit in the first place.
Oh, it does. It so does, because you don't even realize you start mimicking, and whether motives, understanding, and actions, and getting comfortable in that judgment seat that you didn't even know you climbed up into, and you're pointing fingers down. And I think that the Lord, even like this week, confronted me. I was thinking through specks in some individuals, and the Lord reminded me of the forest of logs that I have to go through. It was very humbling.
Yeah, who made you the judge?
Right? Yeah.
It was a common reminder to myself.
Well, fast forwarding to now, what is your relationship with Jesus like, and how does he show up in your life?
My relationship with him is simple. It's real. I honor him for what he's done, and how I honor him is in the breaths that I take and the world and how I see the world through that. So I often say it's very tangible. Like that love is tangible, meaning my response. I'm not earning his love anymore. I'm simply responding out of the gift that I was given. And so to me, what that looks like is I look at suffering. I look at the things around me that are not in accordance to his will. And I respond to those people or to those issues which are around people or are affecting people, and I live my life that way. So, for instance, without getting into the details, I'm just going to kind of underscore some points. If I see people who are homeless or are struggling with housing, that may not have been my dream, that may not have been my call, or at least what I thought was my call, but I need to solve this. I'm going to pray about it. I'm going to invite the answers, and I'm going to solve this. So what that did was it sent me down a long journey to solve that issue. 3 years later, we now have a real solution that will actually change the world. I know that. When I saw suffering because there was injustice and there was, and people were getting, evicted out of homes and left out on the street, like, that wasn't my issue either. I wasn't, excited about that. That wasn't my call. But in accordance to his heart, my compassion because of him, because he had that towards me, I choose to have that compassion towards others. And now things are coming into alignment with him. So that's how it looks like in real ways. People will often say, well, that's not my passion. That's not my lane. That's not my, call, whatever you want to describe it as. But when my heart is loves him and is committed to him, the things that I may not have ever even considered are now my problem too. And I take that problem on and I say, Lord, what do you want to do about it? I'm saying yes to the answer. What does that look like? And oftentimes that answer looks like a lot of grinding and doing things that you would never, ever do. And you commit to them until you see it through, because he has all of them, meaning the answers.
Yeah, right. Wow, that's powerful. I know that we recently spoke to another ministry here, just in conversation, and we've been feeling like we've been called to do something in our life recently. And when we were sharing our hearts with this individual, he said, "You know that you have your purpose when you find the thing that breaks your heart. And once you find that one thing that breaks your heart, what are you going to do about it?" And this is a whole other episode I'll share, but it really reminded me of seeing all the different types of ministries, and yours was one of them. Like, who is caring for the youth so that they can grow up and be the men and women that we need in this world? And what are we going to do about the homeless people? It's just an exciting project that I'm looking forward to sharing more. I'm assuming those are the things that broke your heart you want to do something about.
There was so many disconnects. We're so quick, and I was one of those guys on the sideline at one point saying, like, why is the society so weak? Why is there so much cowardice? Why is there so much just breakdowns? And then it's like, okay, for one, what if they weren't taught what right looks like? What if you didn't help teach them as well? Would you get up and do it, right? Would you get up and it doesn't mean I'm now getting up and, I figured it out and I'm now going to go teach. You're like, that's a lot of learning that I have to now do because, again, who made me the judge, right? For one. And then two, I have to equip myself before I can, even begin to equip others. And so that was one of those things where instead of sitting and complaining, that we have so much breakdown specifically with this young generation, who people would oftentimes write off as the useless generation or the troubled generation or whatever, expletive you want to attach to it, or people would, no, it's our duty to take that territory and simply respond and help them become better, because that is in accordance to Jesus's heart.
Yeah. Now that we're here in the Pacific Northwest, how important is it for us to not be ashamed of the name Jesus Christ?
I'm going to answer that question this way. I've thought about this one a lot for a while. When I sat on the sidelines, I had nothing to talk about. I would never defend the name that I never actually had an attachment to. And so that's what a lot of the shame comes from, is people will hear about him as another entity, as someone somewhere out somewhere. But because they haven't taken the step and said, Lord, what is your heart? I want to emulate it. And when they begin to emulate that heart, it's being passionate about him is not a task anymore. It's an expression. That was the difference for me. I don't defend him because he needs any defense. He doesn't need any of my defense.
Mm-hmm.
What changed things and actually made me effective to be in whatever circle of people that I was around, politically, in all kinds of, divided, territories or backgrounds that people would oftentimes, come from. I simply say, my actions that you see are not my own. It's a response to the mercy and the grace that I've received. So because of that, I choose to love you, and I choose to do this, and this other thing. That's what changed me. You take that away, there's nothing left.
And that gives you your purpose.
There is no way to rebuttal that.
Mm-hmm. Which leads us into the next question. How can we make him, Jesus Christ, part of our daily walk and conversations?
I know that a lot of young people will be listening to this. We're just getting started, and the majority of the youth who are Russian are starting to follow us, which I think it's great.
Amazing. Yeah.
That they need to hear this. They just can't sit in religion in my comfortable seat, but get up and walk the faith.
Well, a comfortable seat is a slow death. I don't think anybody wants it.
True.
But for me, what made me come alive is when I stopped waiting for permission, and I simply said yes to the one who has called me into that space in the first place. He says, if you love me, you will love my people. He's given example after example after example. If you love me, you will love my people. Serve my people, even if it's a cup of cold water in my name. As simple as that. That's what we started. So when I began to say, Lord, I hear you now. It's not theology to me. It's personal. It's out of my love, I want to do this. And so, I mean, for me, it was, I can share the story of what shifted me. I was driving home from Portland, where I was going to college and finishing up my degree, and it was a late night because I was taking late classes. I was working full time, and loaded schedule, and so schooling was in the evenings, and I was coming across the 205 bridge heading northbound. And it was one of those things, like if you would take a snapshot of my life, it looked like I had everything put together, the way I was dressed, the car I drove, the lifestyle I lived, the vacations I took, and the circle of friends I had. It looked from the outside like I was put together, and I made it to some degree to that, age group. I was 25 at the time. And I'm driving across this bridge, and I just have like this just deep sorrow, just like of where in the world. Why do I feel so distant? Where is it? Like, Lord, I'm just so heartbroken at my life, like looking at myself, and I'm like, and I was just, and it was this compassion that just, and it was a cold night, and it was about 11 o'clock going further. And I just had this deep compassion that just went over my heart, and I'm just like, Lord, I'm here in my BMW with my heated seats, and I'm dressed warm, and yet there's people who are just rotting in the streets right now. I don't even know what to do. I have no idea, but my heart is so broken, and I want to just do something, just so I could feel like I have at least began to respond. And that was the one thing that I had in my heart that night. And I remember I'm driving home, and I passed my exit, and I'm just like, Lord, where do I even find someone? I mean, it was freezing. It was a dry night, no ice or rain at the time, but it was freezing. It was, below actually even. And I'm driving down. So I turned off of 205. I went onto 500, got onto 4th Plane, and I'm driving down 4th Plane like a really slow. Just looking, I had some cash. I stopped by the bank, withdrew some cash. So I had a wad of cash in my hand, and I was just looking for homeless people that I could just for myself, even not even for them, just to respond. And I drove all the way down the entire road of 4th Plane from 205 down to where it ended on the other side of Vancouver, on the west side of Vancouver. No one, not one. Like, wow. And I remembered about seeing this homeless shelter. It was called Open House Ministries. And so I pulled up to that, and I saw that there was a few people standing outside, some were having conversations, some were smoking, and chatting. And I walked out of my car kind of timidly, like wondering, who am I going to approach? How am I going to approach them? What am I going to say? I have no idea. And I'm dressed up, anyway. So I'm not fitting into the vibe either. I'm like as far out as you could possibly imagine. And I'm walking down this path. I pass the front of it, walk around the corner, and I see this young lady. She was standing just with I don't know what do you call them, like a robe or something like that. And she was just staring up at the stars. And I very carefully, I approached her, and I asked, hey, is it okay if I just give you this? And so because I didn't know how else to, totally clueless. And so I came up to her, I stretched out my hand, I gave her what was in mine, and she looks at me, or she looks at it, opens her hand, she looks at it, and then she asked, can I give you a hug? And she ran up and just and gave me a hug. She says, you don't know what this means to me. And she was confused, and it was just strange. Like, I've never met her, right? And I turned around, and I teared up, and I'm walking to my car, just like I felt connection for the first time in this space of responding, connection to a human that I didn't know, And that was one of those acts. And it's not like I've not ever done anything good for people, but this was the journey that began reeling. This was Jesus reeling me in. So I went to my car, I pulled out whatever else I had, and just came up and said, "Here, this belongs to you, and have a Merry Christmas." And I walked away. But that just it wrecked me, and it shaped the course, the trajectory of how I began to see people. I began to notice people.
Yeah.
Very differently.
I think a lot of people just want to be acknowledged that they have a story, that they are human and they're not just. And I think that's when I moved, being from Indiana, when I moved here, it broke my heart to see the homeless. And I was shocked. It was just like a culture shock, as if I went to outer space, to a different world. And I've never seen this many homeless people. I mean, we'll have like one or two in the city of Indianapolis, but I never really saw that besides in my home country, And I was a kid back then, so I remember some things, but not everything. And then coming here, I thought, we're in the U.S. This is the place where I was brought because there's so much opportunity as an immigrant. What's going on? And it really broke my heart. And then little by little, I started meeting people here in the Pacific Northwest, and their hearts were so hard towards the homeless people. And I thought, why are their hearts so hard? And they would give me 1,001 excuses on why they don't want to help the homeless, why they unfortunately have so little regard for them. And it started hardening up my heart too. And it wasn't until you start talking to Mark and you guys were all talking about your project, upcoming project, that I thought, there's finally a solution. Finally, I don't have to feel constantly that no one's ever going to do something, that there's something that actually can be done. People can get back on their feet, because I sometimes I thought, am I going to be homeless because of the difficulties that when we got here, we couldn't find jobs, and that person could be me, constantly thinking that. And I'm sure that it goes through a lot of people's heads, especially how expensive things are getting, that they too could lose their home at any moment. It's the reality that we're living in, unfortunately, in this society today. Just by how expensive things get, that a single parent could be struggling just to keep up rent, because rent is just shooting through the roof. It's an epidemic of housing issues here, especially here. So thank you for sharing that. That's really speaks to us for sure. And I'm hoping the audience will open up their heart and think about that there's more to that story than just, I don't have housing because maybe I don't want to work, but it's more than that. There's a whole other universe that we don't know about in each person that's walking down the street right now.
It's so both painful and beautiful at the same time when the Lord takes your heart and takes you to that edge and shows you, opens up your eyes. And I feel like when I had those moments the very first time, the Lord just started taking the veils off my eyes of religion. And by religion, and I mean, it's just the comfort of life. I would share this with my wife, with Cindy, and with others, that I feel like my upbringing has been so comfortable, and I was around church 24/7. And I mean that both during summer, spring, winter, going to the park with someone with a family member, cousins, a church member, but just always surrounded by that circle. But when the Lord started showing me that, look, there are people that are broken around you, that are in need of not only spiritual food, but also materialistic needs that they have. And it's the needs that they have around, and that we are to walk up to that calling, to match our faith with our actions, with our words, that all those worlds become one. That what you speak of, what you read of, what Jesus has said, then for you to go out to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. Like you said, it just simply started off with you guys is just giving that cup of water. it was that first step of service, of action. And I feel like that very first step for a young Christian, for a person of faith, where it really you hit Jesus, you really start to encounter, start where God is able to step in and start working, start drastically changing your life, taking off comfort, whether that's money, fame, just the comfort of life, four walls of a church, but actually to go meet the needs of the broken, of the widows, of the orphans, of the homeless men and women, to where you're able to actually walk your faith out through your actions and your words.
Which brings us to the next question. What is it that you do through Flash Love to be the hands and feet of Jesus? What programs do you have?
Everything we do is about human connection. It's one of the things that are underscored, I think, the least. It's like what we oftentimes hear is, well, here's all the things that Jesus did. And he didn't use very many material resources besides the bread and the fish that we know of, right? Most of what he used was he called it down from heaven. It's like, well, I'm not calling anything down from heaven right now, but I'm living in the side of Acts where people came and then they brought their possessions, before the disciples' feet, and they distributed it amongst themselves, and there was no need among them. It was that kind of a reality that they lived, and there was no need among them. What if that could be our reality today? So one of the things in the primary things that we focus on is we are building connections, because what I want to underscore, and for a lot of the listeners, who are going to be hearing this may be new or a concept that they may have not thought about. We oftentimes, wonder, like, why in the world would the youth run away from home? If they had a home, now they're homeless. And I ask, those who often wonder that, like, what if the hell they ran away from was worse than the hell that they came into? So what if there was so much destruction that was happening in the homes? It was better to be on the street and cold and hungry, because the life at home was that much worse. I can't tell you how many foster kids I've ran across, in the streets, and would have a conversation. They're out from that side of the country, down from south. They're just roaming somewhere because the terror that they've lived through, they want to be as far from it as possible. And they're not even of age, just out on the streets, running from that thing that grasped them so long. So having, that human connection, one of the first things we do is we give them a family. It's not saying, hey, come to my church, we have it figured out, you'll have a sense of belonging. No, we're going to you. And so when we do these, neighborhood events or community events, a lot of times people think like, what's your painting this wall going to fix anything? What's you giving away Christmas trees going to fix anything? What's this thing that you're this other, event, let's say you're giving out grocery bags. What's that going to do? How's that going to change anyone? What they don't realize is that gives us an open door, a physical one, but also one into their heart, where we simply love them. Not with a message that's been packed, 5-minute message, cramped or compressed into a 30-minute elevator speech. No, it's not about that. It's about, we hear you, we see you, we notice you, and we're here to simply love you. What that does is it begins to break those walls. And so every event that we do, no matter what it's described as, no matter what the actual work looks like, it gives us an opportunity to set a table, because oftentimes there is one. We set a table and we invite them to a feast. There's the worship team that is, that is simply playing music, right? There is a group of people who are doing this, whatever this act happens to be. Like I said, whether it's removing graffiti, picking up trash in a park or in a neighborhood, and simply saying, we love you and we want you to come and dine at this table with us, right? So it's those kinds of opportunities. There's times when there is no table. It's just that human connection, and they get to see, they get to follow, they get to, one day, and hopefully, someday soon, come to the next event or whatever that looks like. But it's about lighting these little fires, igniting these little fires for people to simply be a part of something. And so when there's this, heart-to-heart conversation now, that gives them an opportunity to have more. And what more looks like, again, it really creates, a space and an environment for people to express. I get a lot of frustrated evangelists, who would say things like, I'm really struggling getting my students, to go and simply, declare the Lord is good. I'm like, okay, what if we simply set the conditions for the people that came that weren't even part of an evangelistic team? And you simply gave them permission by saying, hey, those people need you. Your kind words really will shape their life. They're hungry for that kindness. They're hungry for that love if you can release it to them. And it just happens naturally, it seems like, without effort. For me having to give them a script, nothing. It just changes them because they've received something that they've not received without some kind of an expectation in the past. And it's confusing to some of them. They'll even sometimes be mean, when they receive that kind word. Because every time a kind word came around, it always came with the hook on the other side. So when we engage the community, that's our focus. I can go into the logistics of it, of what other things look like. But when we engage, whatever event we happen to do, it's always around people and it's always around relationships. And that's what's creating this change.
Everything you've said, I always wonder, how is it that you engage so many youth? Because I feel like I connect well with other adults and I've mentored youth, but when I see all the people that show up, it's literally mobs of people, right? That's how Flash Love started, with a flash of love by a mob, right, of people. I thought, how does he do that? Like, how does all these youth, and then seeing the most recent event that you did for Christmas for all those moms, how do you engage all these youth to come together and do something for the city? How is it that you help youth feel welcomed and that they're wanted? And I feel like I just finally got my answer today. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, I'm going to give you another answer. The other answer is we formed a group called CLC or Community Leadership Council. And so we invited leaders. When I say leaders, I'm talking, whether they were appointed by an organization like the recent one, Living Hope Church or Kingdom Movement Church, are sending representatives, to others are simply saying, hey, I'm from this church. Can I help? And so we invite them to a table and we let them dream. And we let them dream of helping us create the next event. So their DNA, their fingerprint is on the next event. And that next event could be as far as an hour and a half to the east from here in Klickitat, little tiny town called Klickitat in Klickitat County. It's so small you can yawn past it. But yet this little town, there is the same hearts, the same, needs oftentimes, and sometimes worse. Sometimes the hopelessness is so bad where then, drug use and abuse comes in, and the frustrated sheriff is putting up, a billboard like, if I catch you in my town and you're a dealer, I will shoot you on sight, type language. Wow. So much frustration and so much unnecessary suffering and death. So they get to create, what does that event look like? So we're preparing right now a party that's going to show up in that little town. And we're going to set a banquet table for that whole town to show up to. And we're going to arrive, likely in the evening, because we're going to stop by another town before we get there. And the youth are going to simply deliver grocery bags. We're going to buy thousands of dollars worth of groceries and go house to house and simply knock and say, hey, we brought this for you. If there's anything you don't like, we'll take it, to another, but this is for you. By the way, there's a banquet table set and we'd love for you to come and join us.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so we're inviting the whole town to come and celebrate. And see, through that conversation, through that festivity, through that evening, we get to invite some of those youth who would consider being part of that conversation and part of that team of architects who are going to draft up the next event at the next town. And now they're participating. The intent is to invite them. The intent is to fund them. The intent is to give them the means, all the tools so they can dream without any limitations. We provide the funding by inviting the business community to participate. We provide the transportation through the buses that we bought through the businesses that participate. And all of a sudden, everyone's playing a part. It's not limited. Those events are not limited to youth. They're just the ones who plan it. I say, what if you could plan something so big that the mayors would come to? What if you could plan something so big that would affect everyone in that town? And when that little light of hope hits that little town, that becomes the talk of the town, and that brings hope. Hope brings ideas. Hope begins to help people dream and think and color again.
Transform.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because the title of our program is Mercy on Display, obviously we see in different ways that the Lord is showing his mercy to his people through the works of yours and all your volunteers' hands. But how have you seen God in your life through Flash Love and those that you work with who are not believers, those who are what others call secular, or what in the Old Testament you'll hear called, or in the New Testament you'll hear called the Gentiles, right? Which really are us. We just happen to believe. But how do you see that in your life?
I love those the most. And they come in the same way, and they understand the language I speak. My language is not, trapped in the four walls. The language of love actually has no weapon formed against it. You see, they understand compassion. They understand love. And when I was able to disconnect my mind from the limitations of what a seasoned or perfect Christian looks like, or at least one that fits in the walls, I began to see and realize that the world was so hungry for that word, for that action that was attached to it, that if I speak and move with that kind of compassion with them, they come in droves. So the organization is not steered towards a political party. It's simply responding to the hurt that is around all of us. And I'm inviting the perfect ones, which was myself at one time, into the story and saying, hey, would you help us serve the less perfect ones than yourself? And we will all become one beautiful mess. We will all, and the world gets it. The world wants to be a part of that imperfect mess because they understand that they're, where they're at, and they see and they feel something that they don't know how to say no to. That's the difference. They don't know how to say no to that compassion that is extended to them. And the first response is, how can I help? When does that next one look like? What if we simply had an arm that poured out, from the warm pews into the colder streets and helped serve people that we would never see ourselves serving? That would be a very different kind of heaven, huh?
Yeah.
Almost like a heaven on earth.
Yeah.
It would be. Which brings us to our final question, which I'm excited for you to share. What is it that you're doing next now that or what you've been preparing for a long time, to address the homeless situation?
So to every town that we go to every mayor that we have a conversation with, to every police chief that we meet with, and the large celebration that we're inviting them to on May 31st coming up this year, a large banquet celebration that will be at the Hilton Hotel. I just wanted to throw that in.
Wow.
What we're inviting them to is a journey, a story of what's developing, and that is we have unlocked a forest to the south of us, but not limited to, of the abundance, the manna, the trees, the resources that we've needed to build a solution that is on the scale of not just the United States, obviously much bigger than this little county. So the solution is here. It just needed some pieces pulled together. It needed some refinement. It needed some walls that needed to be broken legally, and logistically. And now we have a plan and a trained up team that is about to display to the world, starting with our little county, our little community, that a house is available for everyone. And there's many ways of how to put that together. Some of that will come through grants. Some of that will come through loans, forgivable loans, low interest loans, and other means. So we can deliver to everyone that absolutely wants one. And we'll start with, a priority list. the women and children, the elderly, and then continue to move down that line. There's a lot of people that need help. We're starting with that priority list, and we choose that priority. Well, heaven did, but now we're implemented in such a way.
Oh, we're really excited for that. And
That's so exciting. Thank you so much for sharing your heart, the vision that the Lord continues to unfold before your eyes. And thank you so much for answering that call and for your humility as well, that to allow yourself to be the hands and feet and an instrument of the Lord's will here on earth. And like you said, that we can truly live in a heaven-like earth here right now, to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. So thank you for your heart.
I thank you for giving me a voice.
oh, I'm excited to share this with a lot more community. And actually, you can find how to connect with Andrey on the show notes, how to join you if they want to participate or they want to donate. So we'll put those links there.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review so we can continue to reach more people. Also, make sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel.